We sent the distress call on 17 frequencies. 17. Because our communications officer, bless her three hearts, believed redundancy was the closest thing to prayer in deep space. She was right, mostly. The signal reached 14 civilizations. 11 of them assessed the situation, calculated the odds of surviving a Vorkai siege, and sent formal letters of condolence. 2 sent food packets. 1 sent them. I want to be precise about something, because I have been a field medic for the Interstellar Cooperative for 19 standard years, and precision is the only thing that separates my profession from guessing. When the Vorkai surrounded Station Delhari 9, we had 412 civilians, 63 wounded, 11 days of rations, and 0 military assets. We needed surgeons. Evacuation transports. Perhaps a diplomatic envoy with enough political weight to negotiate a corridor. The humans sent 8 soldiers. 8. I reviewed the transmission 3 times. I made Ensign Vale read it aloud to me because I believed my translator implant had finally failed. 8 humans, 1 drop pod, 0 explanation. The message attached was 4 words. We're coming. Hold on. What followed was the 41 most confusing hours of my career. I've filed this account with Cooperative Command not as a commendation, though what occurred here warrants several, but as a warning. Not about the Vorkai. About the humans. About what happens when something built for survival decides it has something worth protecting. About the specific and terrible look in Sergeant Yara Osei's eyes when they told her there were children in Sublevel 3. I need command to understand what that look means. I'm not sure I fully do yet. The following account is logged in 3 parts. Timestamps are approximate. My hands were not entirely steady. The pod hit the outer dock at an angle that suggested either tremendous skill or tremendous indifference to personal safety. I was in the triage corridor when it happened. The station shuddered, that low, structural groan that makes your bones feel like they're filing a complaint, and I grabbed the nearest wall conduit with all 4 hands because my nervous system has a very emphatic policy about falling. Ensign Vale, who had been helping me repack a wound kit, simply sat down on the floor and covered his head. Not because it helped. He does it reflexively now. We've been under siege for 8 days. It has been an instructive 8 days. That's not Vorkai, he said from the floor. Their impacts have a rotation signature. He was correct. I had noted the same thing. What I had not noted, until the dock camera feed flickered back to life 20 seconds later, was the figure standing in the wreckage of the docking collar, smoke pouring from the pod behind her, a kit bag over one shoulder, a weapon I did not recognize at all slung across the other, tilting her head left, then, right, then, consulting something on her wrist. Then, she looked directly at the camera. "Hey," she said. Her mouth moved. The audio translated a half-second late, the way it always does with human speech, because their vocal register is so densely layered that our systems have to peel it like something with too many skins. "Is this the medical station? The one with the siege problem?" I pressed the intercom. "Yes," I said. "Great." She turned back to the pod. "Oh, say." Delhari confirmed. "Pull the others." There were 8 of them. I want to describe this with the clinical detachment appropriate to a field record, but I find that difficult even now, days later, with the benefit of distance and sedatives. There were 8 humans. They were wearing armor that had clearly seen significant use, scored, patched in 3 places with material that was not the original, one chest piece bearing a repair line that ran from shoulder to hip like a healed scar. They moved through the dock the way water moves around stones, without discussion, without visible command, just orientation. Each one finding a position. Each one facing outward. The one from the camera, Sergeant Yara Osei, I learned, was not the largest. She was middle height, compact the way a compressed spring is compact. Her head was shaved close on the sides, tight coils at the crown. She had a scar through her left eyebrow that had never been cosmetically addressed, which I noted because every species I've worked with addresses facial scarring when they can. She had chosen not to. I found this extremely legible and did not enjoy the legibility. She gave the doc a single rotation of her gaze, methodical, sector by sector, and then turned to me. I am 1.7 standard lengths tall. She was slightly shorter. She looked at me the way I have seen senior surgeons look at a patient's scan, total focus, rapid triage, decision incoming. Medic? Field officer, medical division, I said. Shinvaris. Oh say. She jerked her chin at her unit. Kovac. Pham. Delacroix. Nwosu. Mira. Torres. And, the one currently lying down is Baxter. He's fine, he just does that. The one called Baxter was indeed lying flat on the dock floor. He raised one hand in acknowledgement without opening his eyes. We requested medical support, I said. This came out more plaintively than I intended. And, an evacuation corridor. Coalition's got the corridor locked 6 sectors out. Won't commit until the Vorkai pull back. Osei set her kit bag down and unzipped it with the ease of someone who has had this exact conversation before and found it boring. So we're the interim. You're 8 people. Yeah. She pulled something from the bag, a device I didn't recognize, compact and dark, with a small projecting lens, and began scanning the dock walls. How many Vorkai? My secondary stomach lodged a renewed complaint. Approximately 240, I said. Perimeter siege. 3 points of pressure on the outer hull. They've been cutting into Junction 7 for 6 days. Junction 7. She didn't look up from the scanner. That's toward the sublevels? Sublevel 3. Yes. That's where we've moved the... I stopped. She did look up then. Children, I said. There are children in sublevel 3. 61. They were here for a schooling program when the Vorkai arrived. Nothing moved in her face. That was the moment I catalogued and filed away for this report. Not what she said nothing. Not what she did, she went back to scanning. It was the specific quality of the stillness. Like something that had been a question became a statement. Like the shape of the next 40 hours just settled into place behind her eyes and she accepted it the way you accept weather. Kovac, she said. Yeah. Sublevel 3. Map it. Already pulling schematics. Kovac, tall, narrow, the kind of build that makes you wonder about early nutrition, had a display running on his forearm that I had not noticed him activate. Junction 7 breach point is 30 meters from the stairwell access. 30 meters. 32. 32 meters. She looked at me. How long has Junction 7 been compromised? 6 days of active cutting. At their current rate, they breach the inner seal in approximately 40 hours. She nodded once. Went back to the bag. We have 40 hours, she said, to no one in particular, or to everyone, or to the bag. That's fine. I have worked alongside Grethali warriors. Tannic Marines. Savari shock response units. Each culture has its pre-engagement ritual. The Grethali vocalize a specific tonal sequence, the Tannic perform a joint spinal alignment, the Savari remove their secondary arms and re-rack them in a motion that is equal parts functional and ceremonial. The humans ate. They sat in a loose cluster on the dock floor, not a circle, never a circle, I noted, always in irregular shape with sightlines maintained, and ate. Ration packs. Terrible smelling things. Baxter, who had risen from his horizontal position with no apparent transition, was eating something that produced a smell I can only describe as what I imagine a chemical processing error tastes like. It's called beef jerky, said Pham, noticing my expression. She was the youngest looking of the 8, with very direct eyes and the habit of smiling at things that were not funny. Want some? No, I said. Thank you. It's an acquired taste. I believe you. You really don't want it, Kovac said. She's being polite. It's terrible. I like it, Baxter said. We know, Bax. That's the problem. Osei was not eating. She was at the dock's main console, which she had accessed without asking, using a bypass sequence I had not seen before and would have said was not possible on our hardware, running the sensor sweeps I had already run 8 times. I watched her run them again. Then, again, with different parameters. Then, she pulled up a schematic I had not thought to look at, the thermal mapping. Not the Vorkai positions. The heat signatures in the walls. The cutting equipment. The power draw. They're not cutting randomly, she said. We know. They're targeting Junction 7. They're targeting it from 3 angles and letting us watch one. She overlaid a secondary map. This cut, she pointed to a position I had logged as secondary, minor, probably structural stress from the main breach. This one isn't Junction 7. It's the thermal coupling for sublevel 3's ventilation. Ensign Vale made a sound. I looked at the map. She was correct. If the thermal coupling failed, sublevel 3 would lose climate control within, I ran the calculation, approximately 18 hours before the primary breach. In the environmental conditions of this station's outer orbit, that meant temperature drop. 61 children and 18 adult civilians, no thermal suits rated for a full system loss. Not a siege. A call. They were going to freeze out the sublevels before the breach, so that when they came through Junction 7, the station's will to resist would already be lying on the floor. How did we not? Vale started. You were watching the breach, Osei said, not unkindly. They knew you would be. She turned from the console. Her unit was already standing. None of them had been given a signal I could identify. Delacroix. Torres. You're on the coupling. Find me a way to keep it warm with what's on this station. Delacroix, short, with a voice like something dragged over gravel, tilted his head. Define what's on this station. Whatever you find. He looked at Torres. Torres looked at the ceiling the way people look at ceilings when they are performing calculation. Med units have thermal packs, Torres said. If we chain them, chain them. Osei was already moving. Varis. Yes. You have wounded in triage. How many mobile? 12 can walk. 19 cannot. The 12, are any of them combat trained? I paused. 1, I said. A cooperative security officer. Keenan. She was injured in the initial bombardment. Fractured secondary arm, bruised lung capacity. Can she hold a position? She would tell you yes regardless of my answer. Osei almost smiled. Not quite. The corner of her mouth moved in a way that implied the concept of amusement was present but not invited inside. Get her. I need bodies on the sublevel stairwells. She looked at me with that same scan and triage directness. I need you, too. I'm a medic. I know. I need you to know where everyone is so that when something goes wrong, you can move. When, I said. Not if. When, she confirmed. It was hour 3 by my estimate. The stomach pain scale had upgraded to persistent ache, which I placed it somewhere around hour 3 when Nwosu found the secondary problem. Nwosu was the quietest of them. Large in a way that seemed architectural rather than biological, he moved with a deliberateness that at first I read as slowness and, then, recalibrated as the opposite, nothing wasted. He had been running a sweep of the inner corridors and came back to Osei with a look on his face that I had begun, in 3 hours, to read as, this is bad but, I am not going to perform it as bad. We have a leak, he said. What kind? Information kind. He handed her a small recording device, not ours, not standard cooperative hardware. Found it in the med supply junction. Someone on this station has been transmitting to the Vorkai perimeter. The corridor went very quiet. Not because of what he said. Because of the way Osei's face did the stillness thing again, and everyone in her unit felt it without looking at her, and adjusted. Baxter, who had been leaning against the wall apparently half asleep, was no longer leaning. Since when, she said. Transmitter's active log goes back 11 days. 3 days before the siege began. I put my hands flat against my thighs, which is what I do when I am preventing myself from speaking before I have thought. Ensign Vale had no such habit. He said, quite clearly, a phrase from his homeworld that does not translate but that the translator implant rendered as a sustained tone of dismay. They knew we were requesting aid, I said. My voice came out more level than I expected. They knew what kind. They knew we wouldn't get military response in time. Osei looked at me. They knew, I said again, because saying it once had not made it real, that we were undefended. They thought you were undefended, she said. She handed the device back to Nwosu. Lock the med supply junction. Don't move the transmitter, I want it active. She glanced at Pham. Run me a ghost signal. Same frequency, pattern variation. Make it look like they're still getting what they were getting. Pham was already sitting down cross-legged on the floor with her equipment out, the smile still present, still not funny. 30 minutes, she said. 20. 25. Fine. Osei turned back to the corridor schematic. She tilted her head left, then right, the same gesture I had seen in the dock camera footage, the same one I would come to understand as her thinking motion, the hinge of her particular cognition, and she started to build something out of 40 hours and 8 people that had no right to be what it became. Medic's note, my secondary stomach, by hour 6, had progressed to something I can only describe as a full committee meeting of disagreement. I mention this not for medical record purposes but because it is the only personal data point I trust completely from this period. Everything else I saw, I have checked 3 times against camera logs to confirm I did not hallucinate. I did not hallucinate, to approximately hour 24. Stomach committee has reached a consensus, distress. I am eating a ration bar I found in the supply cabinet that expired 2 seasons ago. It tastes like a decision I regret. The ghost signal worked for 6 hours. Pham built it the way she apparently built everything, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her equipment spread around her in a radius, humming something tuneless under her breath, occasionally asking Kovac to hand her a component and accepting his refusal to touch her things with patient silence before retrieving it herself. The signal she produced mimicked the informant's transmission pattern down to what she called the nervous tick, a micro-hesitation in the pulse interval that she said was a behavioral signature, unique as a fingerprint, the kind of thing only someone who had been transmitting frightened and, in secret, would produce. I asked her how she knew it was fear in the transmission. She looked at me for a moment. Irregular intervals, she said. Fast bursts, then, long waits. Either they had access windows, or they were scared of being caught. She paused. Probably both. You're telling the Vorkai we're still receiving their feed, I said. That they still have an inside line. I'm telling them everything is proceeding normally. She adjusted something. For about 6 more hours. Then, the pattern variance will compound and they'll notice. And, then? She glanced at Osei, who was across the corridor doing something to the wall panel that I could not see. Then, we hope the first part worked, she said. The first part was the coupling. Delacroix and Torres worked for 4 hours in the sub-level maintenance shaft, a space I was told was, and I will quote Torres precisely, the kind of crawlspace that makes you appreciate the outside of crawlspaces, rigging a thermal chain from the medical unit's emergency heating packs through the station's secondary ventilation network. It was not elegant. Delacroix described it, when he emerged, as functionally a space heater made of other space heaters tied together with intention and spite. It worked. Sub-level 3's temperature held. I went down to check the civilians, 18 adults, 61 children, all of them in the converted gymnasium that smelled of recycled air and collective anxiety, and discovered that 3 of the children had gotten through the access hatch into the maintenance shaft during the hours Torres and Delacroix were working in it, apparently attracted by the activity, and that Torres had drafted them as assistant engineers rather than send them back, which explained why one of the children was proudly wearing a strip of conduit tape on her wrist like a badge when I arrived. She showed it to me with complete seriousness. I held the thermal coupler while he soldered, she said. Her name was Emery. She was perhaps 7 standard years. She had the particular self-possession of children who have been frightened for too long and have metabolized it into something functional. That's important work, I said. He said I had steady hands for a civilian, she said. And her face did something, this complicated, layered thing, pride and the specific grief of a compliment that arrives in a place that has been afraid, and I looked away from it because my emotional processing has limits and I had already exceeded them approximately 4 hours prior. Torres, to his credit, had not noticed the effect he'd produced. He was already back in the shaft, checking junctions. Humans, I was coming to understand, frequently did not notice the effects they produced. Not because they were careless. Because they were elsewhere. Already at the next problem. Osei found the informant at hour 9. I was not present for the initial confrontation. I have the camera record. I have reviewed it 4 times. The informant was a maintenance worker, Vorkai adjacent by economic alliance, not by biology, the kind of arrangement that the siege economy of the outer sectors produces with grim regularity. He had been transmitting from the supply junction every second day for 11 days. When Osei found him, he was attempting to remove the transmitter, presumably because he had realized something was wrong with the signal. She had Nwosu and Miro with her. She did not arrest him. She did not threaten him. She sat down on a crate across from him, and I watched on the camera feed as she spoke for approximately 4 minutes. I could not read her lips. The audio from that section of the station was compromised. What I could see was his face, the progression from defiance to something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. The specific expression of someone realizing they have been positioned rather than caught. She stood up. Said one more thing. Left. He sat there for a long moment. Then, he began transmitting again, the real signal, not Fam's ghost, but, with Nwosu standing behind him, and, different content in the message. I asked Osei what she had said to him. She was quiet for a moment. We were walking the corridor toward the Junction 7 monitoring point, and, she had that head tilt again, left, then, right, and, I noticed for the first time that she did it when she was deciding what to share. I told him the Vorkai were going to freeze the sublevels, she said. I told him there were 61 children in sublevel 3. And I told him that if he didn't think that was a problem, he should keep his mouth shut, and if he did think it was a problem, he should help me. I waited. He has a daughter, she said. On a station 2 sectors from here. Under Vorkai economic control. She didn't say anything else. I didn't ask. What he transmitted changed the Vorkai's approach. I don't know exactly what Osei told him to send. The full technical content went over my head. I am a medic, not a strategist. My understanding of military communication is approximately 3 layers deep before it becomes vocabulary I don't have. What I understood was this: the transmission suggested that the station's defensive capability was centralized. That the medical wing was the command point. That the humans, if they were present, and the transmission suggested it was uncertain whether they were truly present or a desperation bluff, were concentrated there. It was, in the technical language I had to have explained to me by Kovac, a bag. The Vorkai were going to be a bag. You're going to let them breach, I said. You're going to guide them to a breach point you choose, away from sublevel 3, and then, we're going to be there, Kovac said. He said it the way you'd say, we're going to the market. Flat. Familiar. When they come through the wall. 8 of you. Against the number that comes through the breach point we're pointing them toward. Not 240. He tapped the schematic. This corridor is 3 meters wide. You can funnel 240 down to a number that fits in 3 meters. I looked at the corridor. 3 meters wide. 60 meters long. 1 entrance point. 8 humans. You're going to stand in a corridor, I said, and wait for them to come to you. Kovac seemed to sense something in my tone that merited a direct look. He had the quality, not all of them had it, but he did, of precision in communication. When he wanted you to understand something, he chose each word like it had a specific use and no decorative function. We're not going to stand in it, he said. We're going to own it. Hour 16. The Vorkai shifted. I watched it on the sensor array, the slow, deliberate reorientation of their pressure points, the withdrawal from the 2 secondary breach attempts, the concentration of heat signatures toward the corridor we had seeded. They moved the way tides move, nothing visible changing, and, then, everything different. Osei stood at the sensor console and watched it with me. "How long?" she said. "At this rate? 8 hours to full commitment. 12 to breach." She nodded. Turned. "Get your wounded moved to sub-level 3. Everyone who can't fight, below the junction. You're expecting the medical wing to take fire." "I'm expecting the building to take a lot of fire," she said. "The medical wing is part of the building." I spent the next 3 hours moving 19 non-mobile wounded, all medical supplies that could be transported, and Ensign Vale, who could in principle walk but whose ability to maintain function under stress I had assessed as approximately that of a 3-legged table, to sub-level 3. It took 11 trips. My arms stopped being entities I felt emotional connection to around trip 7. Emery and 2 other children helped with supply crates. I did not argue about this. There was no time, and the children needed, I sensed, to be doing something. The worst thing you can give a frightened child is nothing to do. "Is it going to be okay?" Emery asked, on the second trip, hauling a medkit that was technically too heavy for her. "I am a medic. We are trained in honest communication calibrated to emotional context. I have told families their person will not recover. I have told patients things they did not want to hear with the specific gentleness the information required." I looked at Emery. "There are people upstairs," I said, working very hard on that question. She considered this with the focused seriousness she applied to everything. "The humans?" "Yes. The one with the thing on her head, the tightly coiled hair thing, she came down earlier," Emery said. "To check the temperature." I hadn't known that. She told Marta, one of the adult civilians, a schoolteacher, who had been holding the children together with a composure that deserved its own commendation. She told Marta to keep them in the back third of the gymnasium. Away from the walls. "She's being careful," I said. "She said it like it was already decided," Emery said. "That it would be okay. She didn't say it like a question. She said it the way you say the floor is there when you step on it." I picked up the other end of the medkit. We carried it down together. Hour 22 hit me like a wall I had not seen. I had been moving for 15 consecutive hours. My body runs on a different cycle than humans. I don't sleep in the same pattern, but I have a threshold, and I found myself sitting against the corridor wall outside sub-level 3 with my secondary hands pressed flat to my secondary stomach and my primary hands just hanging. Doing nothing. An extraordinary luxury. Baxter found me there. I say found, he appeared, the way he tended to appear, without a traceable entrance trajectory. He sat down beside me against the wall, extended his legs out, and was quiet for a moment. He was eating something again. The smell was less offensive this time. More like something warm and simple. "You should get some rest," he said. Not a suggestion. Just a statement of what should happen in a sensible universe. I have wounded to monitor. Myra's down there. She did a field trauma rotation. She'll call you. I didn't move. He was quiet again. He was often quiet. Of all of them, Baxter was the one I had the most difficulty reading, not because he was closed, but because he was present in a way that didn't perform itself. He watched things without broadcasting that he was watching. "You doing okay?" he said. I thought about precision. "No," I said. "Yeah." He ate something. That's the right answer. "I have 61 children in a gymnasium below this floor," I said, 8 people between them and 240 armed combatants, and a corridor that I am expected to believe is a strategic position. I paused. "I am not okay." "The corridor works," he said. "You've done this before." "The corridor thing?" "Yeah." He was quiet. "Different corridor. Different everything else. Did it work?" He looked at the floor. "Mostly," he said. I did not ask what mostly meant. Partly because I had learned, in 22 hours, when to leave a word alone. Partly because his face, in profile, had something in it that I understood without wanting to name. We sat there for a while. The station groaned. Far above us, I knew, Osei and Kovac and the others were finishing their preparations. I had seen enough of the corridor by then to understand what it was becoming, what it was being built into, and the Vorkai were 8 hours from the wall. The girl, I said. Anne-Marie. She said Sergeant Osei came down to check the temperature. Yara checks everything, Baxter said. Twice. She told the teacher to keep them in the back third. He nodded. She's been thinking about those kids since you told her, I said. Since the dock. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Something moved through his face that was not for the corridor, or the mission, or any of the strategic architecture above us. Yeah, he said. She has. He stood, offered me a hand. I took it, 4 of mine to 1 of his, and he pulled me up with a ease that still surprised me despite 6 occasions of evidence. Get an hour, he said. I'll watch the monitors. I looked at him. I don't actually sleep that much, he said, with a quality in his voice that was the closest thing to an explanation he was going to offer. I went and got an hour. Medic's note, I was woken at hour 24 by the sensors registering the Vorkai's first committed breach attempt. I note with some scientific interest that my secondary stomach had, in 1 hour of rest, gone from committee meeting distress to a single clear signal that I believe translates, in my species physiology, to the particular calm of things having been decided. I have felt this before, walking into surgery. Never while walking toward a corridor with 8 humans and 240 reasons to be elsewhere. The difference, I am finding, is the 8 humans. Timestamp, hour 24 to hour 41. I have stopped using my stomach as a clock. It has given me no useful data for the last 6 hours. I believe this is because it has exceeded its capacity for input and has simply stopped responding, the way certain patients stop feeling a wound once it becomes total. They let the Vorkai cut through. This is the part that I need to describe carefully, because my instinct, the instinct of 19 years as a field medic, the instinct that has kept me and the people around me alive through 4 conflict zones and 2 evacuation events, screamed at me for approximately 40 minutes before I understood what I was watching. They let them cut through. The outer seal on Junction 7 seat, not the main Junction 7, the secondary 130 meters down the corridor, the one that Osei had spent 2 hours positioning as the more vulnerable option in the informant's transmissions, began to fail at hour 24 and 3 minutes. The cutting had been ongoing for 2 days. The Vorkai were committed. Their heat signatures were consolidated. They were coming through that wall. Osei knew the exact moment it would breach. She had calculated it from the thermal mapping, the cutting rate, the material composition. She had Kovac triple-check the calculation. And she positioned her 8 people not at the breach point. Not facing the wall. 40 meters behind it. I was at the far end of the corridor, the safe end. Osei had been extremely direct about where I was to stand, watching from around the junction bend with Keenan, the injured security officer, who had a sidearm in her functional hand and an expression on her face that suggested she had already made peace with whatever was about to happen and was simply tracking it. Why 40 meters? I asked her. Quietly. Funnel, she said, equally quiet. You don't stop at the breach. You let them commit past it. She watched the sensor display on the device she'd propped against the wall. You want them in the corridor. All of them. Then, you close it. Close it, I said. She looked at me the way experienced people look at questions they've answered before. Not unkind. Just past. Wait, she said. The wall came in at hour 24, 9 minutes. I heard it before I saw it, not an explosion, which I had expected, but a sustained metallic shriek that my nervous system processed as multiple alarms before my brain caught up, and then, the corridor filled with the particular quality of air that has been outside too recently, carrying cold and something chemical that the station's filters immediately began working on. They came through fast. Vorkai are, I should describe them, because this report may be read by people who have not been in the outer sectors during the resource conflicts. They are large. Broader than they are tall, with a lateral center of gravity that makes them difficult to knock over and very fast at low heights. They use their secondary limbs as a second pair of legs in tight corridors, which makes them faster in enclosed spaces than in open ones. A siege is, for them, the preferred environment. The corridor was, you would think, ideal for them. 14 came through in the first 20 seconds. Then, 8 more. Then, a pause, a command exchange, inaudible at my distance, then, more. They moved in the crouch and scuttle that their morphology produces in tight spaces, weapons up, secondary limbs working. They were 30 meters into the corridor before Osei made a sound. The sound was not a command. It was a single syllable. I don't know if it's a word. I've asked and gotten 3 different answers, and what happened next happened in the same moment. Both ends of the corridor. Simultaneously. The far end, Osei and, for a free unit, at the 40-meter mark, where the corridor was at its narrowest, moving out from the alcoves the station's infrastructure had conveniently provided and, that, I now understood, Osei had been walking slowly on her first day specifically defined. This end, Nwosu and, Mira and, Baxter, materializing from the maintenance access hatch in the wall 15 meters from where I stood, from inside the walls, which they had apparently been in for the last 2 hours, which I had not known, which Baxter's quiet night watch had apparently been cover for, coming out behind the committed Vorkai formation. 40 meters of corridor. 30 plus Vorkai. No exit. I am not going to describe the next 11 minutes in detail. Partly because I was watching sensor data and, not the corridor itself, I have limits, and, watching Keenan's face cycle through expressions I had no framework for was enough. Partly because the audio record is sufficient and, I don't need to reconstruct it. Partly because the specific quality of those 11 minutes is not, I think, the point of this report. What I will describe is the things I noticed. I noticed that Osei moved differently than I expected. I had been constructing a model of her in my head over 24 hours, strategic, controlled, the thinking motion of the head tilt, and, what I saw in the corridor was the same person but, in a different gear. Not frantic. Not rage. Something economical. Something that knew exactly how much force was the correct amount and applied precisely that. I noticed that they communicated without speaking. Not via implant. I checked later, the implant channel was open but barely used. They communicated the way I have only seen in one other context, surgery. The way a team that has been inside a chest together enough times knows where the next hand needs to be before the request is made. I noticed that when Delacroix took a hit, a glancing one, shoulder, he went down to one knee. Torres was already on his right before the knee touched the floor. Did not look. Did not check. Just appeared. And, Delacroix used Torres's shoulder to rise and, continued. I noticed that Baxter, who had seemed to me the softest of them, the one who lay on floors and ate terrible dried meat and kept his voice gentle and his eyes half closed, I noticed that Baxter in the corridor was none of those things and, all of them, simultaneously, in a way that I filed under things I needed more time to understand. I noticed that it was over. 11 minutes. The sensor data stopped showing movement in the corridor. The Vorkai's perimeter signals outside the station were spiking. Internal comms, I assumed, their command structure receiving information it had not predicted. Kovac was already at the external array, reading their response. They're pulling back, he said. Not routing. Repositioning. How far, Osei said. She was breathing at a rate I could measure from here. 2 sectors. Coalition's corridor, they just opened it. He looked up. 6 hours end, the cooperative evac ships will be in range. 6 hours. The station could hold 6 hours with its existing structure. Osei stood in the corridor for a moment. The head tilt left, then right and then a long exhale that she let be loud, the first loud thing I had heard from her that wasn't a command. Check everyone, she said. Delacroix had the shoulder hit, deep bruising, no fracture. I checked it while he told me it was fine and I ignored him the way medics learn to ignore that specific sentence. Mira had a cut along her forearm that she had sealed with a medical strip from her own kit while the corridor was still active, which I made a note to ask her about later. The strip technique was not standard and it was extremely well applied. Torres had a bruise on his ribs he didn't mention until I noticed him breathing shallowly, at which point he admitted it and apologized for not mentioning it, which was the most unnecessary apology I had received in 19 years of field medicine. They were all standing. All functional. I did the count 3 times. 8 people in. 8 people out. The children came up from sublevel 3 at hour 38, when the station's external sensors confirmed the Vorkai perimeter had moved beyond their weapons range. Ose was sitting on the corridor floor, the clean corridor. The station's automated systems were already processing, with her back against the wall and her equipment half deconstructed in front of her, running maintenance checks with the systematic patience of someone who checks because checking is the habit that keeps you alive, not because they expect to find something wrong. Emery found her. I don't know what the child had been told. I don't know if she had been told anything. She came up the corridor with the schoolteacher Marta behind her, and she saw Ose, and she stopped at approximately 3 meters distance and looked at her with the complete serious attention she applied to everything. Ose looked up. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then, Emery held out the conduit tape wristband. The one Torres had given her. Ose looked at it. Then, at Emery. She held out her wrist. Emery wrapped the tape around it, patted it twice with both hands to seal it, and stepped back with the satisfaction of a completed task. "Thank you," Ose said. Emery nodded. Very formal. Then, she went back to the schoolteacher. I watched Ose look at the tape on her wrist for a moment. The corridor was quiet. The station groaned, but softly now, the ambient groan of structural settling, not stress. She went back to her maintenance checks. The coalition evacuation ships arrived at hour 41. I was on the dock when their lead officer came through, a Grethely commander named Seth, formal armor, clean equipment, the look of someone who has arrived to a crisis and found it resolved in a way that creates its own particular administrative inconvenience. She looked at the dock. At the damage. At the 8 humans loading their minimal equipment back into the repaired pod with the efficiency of people who have never fully unpacked. "Field Officer Vares," she said. "Your distress signal indicated the station was on the verge of structural breach." "It was," I said. She looked at the 8 humans again. "The Coalition's timeline placed military intervention at 43 hours from our initial signal," I said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The math was not difficult. "Casualties? On our side?" 3 injuries, all non-critical. "Vorkai?" I told her the corridor number. She did something with her secondary eyes that in Grethely physiology indicates recalibration. 8 operatives, she said. Against a full Vorkai siege unit. 8 operatives, I confirmed. And a corridor, and 41 hours, and considerably more ingenuity than I was prepared to account for. Seth looked at Ose, who was checking the pod's exterior with her scanner, the same methodical sweep she had run on arrival. Ose did not look back. She was already somewhere else in her head, the next problem, or the problem after that, or maybe just the quiet maintenance of the tools that had brought her here and would take her somewhere else. "I'll need their unit designation for the incident report," Seth said. "I have it." I handed her my log. "For what it's worth, Commander, I would encourage the Coalition to read it carefully. To assess their capabilities?" I thought about Emery's steady hands on the thermal coupler. About Baxter on the corridor floor, morning watching the sensors so I could sleep. About the specific quality of Ose's stillness when I told her there were children in sublevel 3. "To understand," I said, "that capability is the smaller part of what you'll need to account for." Seth looked at me. "Meaning?" The pod sealed. The external dock released. Through the dock viewport, I watched the human ship begin its exit vector, no ceremony, no pause, the same economy of motion they brought to everything. I thought about how to finish the sentence. I didn't, quite. Some things land better as weather. Medic's note appended, hour 43, evacuation complete, all civilians aboard Coalition transport. I found the conduit tape wristband on the corner of the medical console when I was clearing the station. Osei had left it there. Whether deliberately or not, I cannot say. I kept it. I'm not certain why. I am a medic. I deal in precision. Some things resist it. Shinvaris, Field Officer, Medical Division, Interstellar Cooperative Station Delhari 9, Incident Report 7714C filed with personal notation. Read this carefully.